Where I grew up is this tiny little house at the end of a dirt road that my dad built with a bulldozer. We didn't have power, we didn't have running water. It was pretty remote, and like in the bio, I wasn't joking about that. I was 5 years old. In the winter, sometimes it gets to about -50 in Celsius. It can get as cold as -60, and on those days you don't go outside very much. So, even if you chopped a lot of wood, you don't really want to go far from the fireplace. So, a lot of times when I was a kid, I would spend up to 3 or 4 days in a row if it was really cold. I wouldn't be able to go to school because the school buses didn't run, and I sure as heck wasn't going to. Now, a lot of people don't realize that, because a lot of people, they want to assimilate. They want to become part of the overarching culture of dominance. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. So, I guess one thing that I will talk about right away, though, before I forget, Philly is pretty cool. Coming here, I really enjoyed the city. I didn't think I would, because I'm a Redskins fan. And so, yeah, I had a very preconceived notion about this place, right? And you guys threw batteries in Santa Claus, So I wasn't too excited about that. But when I came here, I noticed that when I put aside my preconceived notions of what Philadelphia was going to be, I really, really liked it. And I'm not just talking about the food, which, by the way, is really good. But I went to see parks. I saw ancient buildings. Now, you guys are going to laugh when I say ancient, because in Calgary, where I'm currently living, the oldest buildings, and we joke about it, they're historical landmarks, they're like 100 years old. To us, that's like really old. It's like, whoa, they're going to protect that. And meanwhile, I'm hearing from friends that there are actual churches from the 1700s that people are talking about knocking down so they can build another high-rise. And it's just mind-boggling to me, because I think part of the problem, and this is about America in general, it's not just about the Jewish community, is that when you lose your history, you lose little pieces of your identity. Right? Identity, again, and you're gonna hear me use that word a lot tonight, because identity is the key for this struggle. It's the key for almost every struggle. Part of the problem we have is that if we don't know our own identity, we don't manifest our identity, we can't speak up when people attack us. We don't understand properly how to fight back, because we're not even really sure who we are. And this is coming from somebody that when I was growing up, I thought I was white. For a long time, if you would have said, Ryan, what are you? I would have said, well, I'm part Indian, part French, and part Norwegian, and I'm a Canadian. Right? I had no idea that, well, I had some idea that I was Métis. I lived on a Métis reserve. But I had no idea the history of my own people. I didn't, because it wasn't something that was important to me. So even though I was 5 years old and reading encyclopedias about other people's history, that's what I was doing. I was reading about other people's history. And I started to realize probably when I was about 10 years old that there was a large part of history that I had no clue about. I had no idea that all of this other stuff existed. I had no idea, and you might laugh at this, but it's kind of funny, it's kind of sad. I actually believed the British when they said they gave you Israel. I believed that, because I was like, wow, the British, they were really good people. And then it's funny to think about it now, because I was like, wow, these guys are really kind of dicks. Like, all this stuff horrible, But back then, as a kid, reading all of the textbooks that were written by British people, well, of course that's going to be the view of history I have. Like, I remember thinking to myself, it was really cool that they built this whole empire across the world. Because as a young person, that's what you think. And now I look at it and I'm like, wow, those guys were kind of dicks, So it's one of those things where it took an event to kind of change the way I look at the world. And that event actually helped me change the way I saw the world, because it helped me change the way I saw myself. And I realized at that point that I wasn't seeing myself as a Native person through a Native person's eyes. My lens was flawed. My lens was actually a white person's lens. My lens was the lens of a European person who saw the world through a European lens. And I see that very same thing a lot of times in Jewish communities. And it's funny, because I would never have recognized that when I was younger. But now that I've actually gone through a little bit of a decolonization on my own, I'm starting to see it in other people. And it's funny, because the people that need to decolonize the most are the ones that want it the least. Those are the ones that are like telling me, there's one lady in New York, she actually told me, well, Ryan, being a Jew is all about religion. And I said to her, well, I'm just curious then, like if being Jewish is only about religion, then I'm sorry, I have to ask you, what about all your tradition and your culture and the 4,000 years of history? I said, that doesn't have anything to do with it. And I said, don't get me wrong, your spirituality is huge, it's an integral part of who you are.
And we're losing that. Like, my own people lost that for a while because we were forcefully converted. But if you ignore all of the other things that make you Jewish, I mean, how Jewish can you possibly be? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, like, if you ignore the fact that you have 4,000 years of history in the land of Israel, how Jewish can you be? I mean, you're literally ignoring some very key aspects of your own identity. And so I explained to her, and I'm going to explain to you right now, when we're talking about Indigenous identity, think of it like a hand, all right? So on your hand, you have tradition, this finger will say. You have culture. Sorry, I had something else written here, something different. Language, and your family. But now the thumb is the one that we always seem to forget the most, and that's spirituality. Now, as an Indigenous person, I'm telling you, it took me a long time to understand some of these concepts. So I'm not going to be frustrated or upset with you if you come to me with a question about it, or if you kind of look at me like sideways thinking, hey, that doesn't really quite sound right. But here's the thing. If you cut any of those fingers off, you suddenly have a finger that's missing. Your hand still works, right? So you might not even realize that there's a problem. You cut 2 fingers off. Well, it still works pretty good. And then slowly you cut them off, and then you have a stump. And when you have a stump, you don't have anything, because there's nothing that's going to work. But the cool part about identity is that you can regrow those fingers. And I see a lot of organizations now, especially in your community, and there's a couple in my community that we're working on, to try and give people back those fingers, trying to give people back their language. One thing that I see in a lot of American Jewish communities is that a lot of your kids don't speak Hebrew. And that's mind-boggling. I'm on a terrorist watch list, just so you know. Don't worry, I'm not actually a terrorist. I actually started talking about the Canadian government and one of its policies, which is actually an apartheid policy. Now, you guys will understand this because you have people bullshit you all the time. People say, Israel's an apartheid state. But when you ask them, well, how is Israel an apartheid state? Give me some examples. You'll see, just like the video that a friend of mine made and posted of a girl in Tel Aviv, she said, everything about Israel is apartheid. And for 5 minutes after he asked her, what's actually apartheid about Israel? For 5 minutes, she stuttered and couldn't name a single thing. Now, if he would have just said, oh no, Israel's not an apartheid state, and then started to try and explain everything, it would have been an abject fail, right? Because no matter what he would say, she would have some other stupid thing to counter with. But instead, he put her on the spot. And he said, well, okay, fine, explain to me how Israel is an apartheid state. Canada, and I can explain to you how Canada is an apartheid state, is 2 laws for 2 people in the same state. So I would be governed by what's called the British North American Indian Act. And I'm governed by that in a very specific way. I am a ward of the state. I'm not actually even really a Canadian citizen, technically. If you were to go to Canada right now, you would have more rights than me, because you would be governed under British common law. And a lot of people don't understand that about Canada. I can't actually own land on my reserve. So I can apply for land and I can build a house, but I can't own the land. That's just part, because that's part of the way the Indian Act is worded. So when I started studying about treaties and I started studying about all these different things, that's how I started really coming to, the knowledge that I had to support Israel. And it's actually kind of interesting because I think that the reason I support it so strongly is because I realized that, and I learned this actually in Israel, just so you know. It took a little old Israeli guy at a coffee shop who told me this. I support Israel basically because I think it's the moral and ethical thing to do, right? It's not a difficult thing to figure out. But I'm sitting there having coffee, and this little old Israeli guy, he looks over at me and he goes, why do you support the Jews? It makes no sense. And I said to him, I was like, well, it makes perfect sense. It's a moral, ethical, and rational thing to do. And he goes, but people will be mean to you. I was like, I'm from Canada, and I'm an Indian, so yeah, I'm pretty used to that. And so I was like, Indian? I'm like, no, I'm an Indian. Indian, I suppose. So then he said to me, it was something very, at the time, I didn't realize how profound it was. But he said to me, he's like, if people are going to hate you, like, for something you say, make sure it's something good. And I remember thinking, that's pretty badass. Like, that actually that's a good way to live. And I told him, I said, you know what, thank you. So a couple weeks later, I went home and I was writing an article. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, if I'm going to write this article, it needs to be perfect. But not only does it need to be perfect, it needs to be something that when the asshats start sending me nasty messages, believe me, I get a lot of really pleasant messages on Facebook from your cousins. And it's, sometimes it's pretty interesting stuff, right? So I figured to myself, if I'm gonna get these messages, I'm gonna make it worthwhile. So I wrote this article, and I basically said, look, the Jews are an Indigenous people, full stop, and the bottom line is, you can't take that away. And then I used a bunch of nerd language and academic stuff, and I sourced and cited. And it was funny because up until that point, I'd written a few other articles, and I'm pretty prolific on social media. But I wrote this article, and then I looked at it, and I was like, you know what, this isn't gonna cut it. So I crumpled it up, because I'm still one of those people that sometimes writes with a pen. And I know it's weird, I talk to people with my mouth too. Threw it on the ground, and I was like, no, screw this. I grabbed my computer, and I typed up, I would say maybe I let my anger get the best of me a little bit. And I just typed up a letter, and that's the one that kind of got a lot of, went viral, because it's called Dear Palestinians, and if you're bored one day, you might want to read it. I basically told them, look, you guys are tragedy tourists. You don't have a tragedy of your own, so what you've decided to do is steal somebody else's. You've stolen somebody else's history and inverted it. You basically claim to be something you're not, and I'm not having it. And I basically said, look, you're offending me. You offend me when you talk about how you're just like Indians. You offend me when you talk about how you're just like gay people. I'm not gay, by the way, but I still believe in gay rights, so apparently that makes me a terrible person to them. Now, I also said, look, the biggest problem I have with you is not that you talk for your people. I support anybody that wants to actually speak up on behalf of something. But I will never support somebody that just speaks up that denies somebody else's humanity.